coming from the top, you can start to see what I mean by this shoot-to-kill policy. But the British government, when the Herndl family showed they were going to go and try and prosecute the Israeli senior command for war crimes trials, that's when the British government decided it wasn't going to be playing ball anymore. It's all right prosecuting sub-Saharan black African dictators for war crimes, isn't it? But it's not okay to start prosecuting white Western allies. So when it became quite clear that Tony Blair, Jack Straw and Kim Howells weren't going to be assisting, despite the rhetoric, despite their platitudes, they weren't going to be cooperating with the Herndl family quickly realized this and decided that they would have a go themselves at trying to prosecute the senior Israeli army's officers in the UK. They got the soldier, and now they were after these senior army officers. So what they did was take their evidence along to a coroner's court in London, in St Pancras. And the coroner's court in April 2006 issued a verdict of unlawful death for both James Miller and for Tom Herndl. And in Tom Herndl's case, they said that Tom had been deliberately shot at with the intention to kill him. Unlawful killing meant murder. So there's now the coroner, Dr. Andrew Reid, then wrote to the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, requesting basically a murder trial, and also requesting that Israelis open an investigation and also think about extraditing those responsible back over to the UK. Now, Lord Goldsmith demurred, didn't really want to know, but in that very polite, civilized way that the British establishment has, went, we'll see what we can do. He was then asked questions in the House of Lords 3 months later. This is July 2006, by 3 members of Lords. One of those actually was the father-in-law of James Miller's sister. That's just an anecdote and by the by. And they wanted to know whether there was enough evidence for a trial and whether they were going to extradite the Israeli army officers concerned over to the UK. And Lord Goldsmith basically said, no, we have the evidence from the British side, but we don't have the evidence from the Israelis. Now, we've seen what the Israelis do on their investigations, don't we? So this was a joke. So 2007, a year later, no evidence forthcoming. There's still been no evidence forthcoming. There will be no evidence forthcoming for the Israelis on these charges of war crimes. So the British government going to do anything about it? No. So that would seem to be game, set and match, wouldn't it, to the Israelis again. But there is one small glimmer of hope, and it's called universal jurisdiction. Now, universal jurisdiction is for genocide, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Any violation of the Geneva Convention is a war crime. So universal jurisdiction then applies. Universal jurisdiction means country A can arrest someone from country B for crimes committed in country C. What it means in effect, if one of those Israeli army officers arrives in London on a shopping trip, okay, the civil rights laws can nip around to the magistrate's court in Westminster and get an arrest warrant for him, seize him and put him on trial. That actually was done in 2005 with a general called Doron Arzog, who was actually the commander of Rafah at the time of those 3 deaths. The British establishment, though, didn't play ball. Somebody in MI5 or MI6 and Metropolitan Police let it be known to the Israeli embassy that before the general actually landed and got off the plane, he was told, don't get off, stay on where you are, there's an arrest warrant out for you. The Metropolitan Police unit that went round to arrest him wouldn't go on the plane because they claimed they didn't have jurisdiction. They do. We can't go on because the El Al bodyguards there are armed, there'd be a gunfight. Well, surely that's the whole job of a counter-terrorist unit, is to do just that. So So this was a stitch-up. This is a cover-up, rather, preventing the only opportunity we've had for arresting one of them actually on British soil was neutered by the British establishment. And that's what I mean by this legal, moral, and material support for war crimes. So I thought I was going to come here with a little bit of bad news, because the British government only 2 weeks ago had a reading in Parliament of its police bill, and that's just been passed. And one of the clauses in there is trying to reduce the universal jurisdiction area on that. But I'm very pleased to say that today I read that the House of Lords, which is an unelected body, has actually voted against the first reading in the House of Lords. So we still have some opportunity, I hope, to make sure that universal jurisdiction, what they're trying to do is move. You can put out an arrest warrant, but then you need the charge sheet to go in as well, and the Attorney General can intervene. Don't forget, the Attorney General is a political appointment. He's a lawyer, but he's politically chosen by the Prime Minister and Prime Minister. What they're trying to do is move his intervention down at the arrest level, stopping the civil rights lawyers from going in there and prosecuting. Oh, by the way, we've probably got documents and dossiers and all the Israeli battalion commanders, divisional commanders from Operation Cast Lead. So any of those come on a shopping trip to London, they're likely to get arrested as well. So the job is to make sure these people can't leave Israel without fearing arrest. So there you are, to sum up what I've been saying, and that is, I believe that Israel operates a shoot-to-kill policy. This is war crimes, and I believe it's fully supported by both the American and US governments as well. And both those governments will go out of their way to protect Israel. Now the question then is, why? I will argue that what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians has parallels with what both the UK and the US governments are doing worldwide to other people. You open up war crimes charges in the International Criminal Court, you're going to open up the British government and American governments to similar actions as well. And I think that's one of the reasons they're making sure that the Israelis are fully covered on this. One last thing. Those three families, the Herndl families, the Corries and the Millers, spent huge amounts of time and effort, gave up their jobs in order to pursue truth and justice. What chance does a Palestinian family locked up in Gaza with a litre or two of water a day, not sure whether they're going to get their food tomorrow, probably haven't got a roof over their heads either, they don't have a cat in hell's chance of getting any justice whatsoever. And I think the only way that's going to change is if we, as the global citizenry, start to take on board the fact that what is going on and that governments worldwide are not going to do anything about it. It's up to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, you have to come to our meetings to know how the things actually are out there. There's a website, If Americans Only Knew, that a lady called Alison Weir started and runs, and we need more websites like that. We need more meetings like this, and being out there in the public arena to tell people how the situation actually is, and certainly to cover up, as Imtiaz also was saying, covering up for the media with the way the media has become today. I'm going to ask for questions for a few minutes. We were delayed, so I don't think we're going to get thrown out quite yet, in that the delay was not our fault. And there is a gentleman there. I happen to know his name, but Jerry, if you could say your name and if you have any kind of affiliation whatsoever. The microphone's being put on for you, I think.
Hello.
Yeah, you're there.
Yes, Jerry Shoring, an associate member here. I'd like to ask a question. If you could outline how the Israeli lobby is actually structured in Britain. It's well outlined in America, the stranglehold it has on Washington, but can you outline how they have a stranglehold in London as well, with the government there, and possibly also with the press?
I think the press represents the British establishment, so you will certainly hear in the British press apart from occasionally in The Guardian and The Independent, a fairly strong pro-Israeli view, you don't really get to see behind the scenes. As regards a Jewish lobby in the UK, I don't think it's as powerful as AIPAC, etc., in the US. But having said that, there are several organizations. There's the Jewish National Fund UK,
of which our leading politicians are members of the board.
I was about to say, yeah, Tony Blair is an honorary member. The Jewish National Fund, if you don't know, owns 13% of the land of Israel, and no Arab Israeli is allowed to live on that land. So we have Tony Blair is an honorary member. Gordon Brown is another honorary member.
David Cameron.
He may well be. He's certainly a friend of Israel. That is an organization, the Friends of Israel. I was just going to add one other senior member of the British establishment is Lord Guthrie, who used to be the former head of the British Armed Forces. He's also a member honorary member as well. So you can see there are links here into the top of the establishment. Quite what they do behind the scenes, I'm not so sure. I think the US, at least in the US, it's much more out front. I think in the UK, it's a bit more opaque. And I just mentioned another one there is the Friends of Israel. And they have annual dinners every year, and a lot of the, certainly the Conservative Party MPs are members of that. So that's clearly going to have an effect on foreign policy towards Israel, I'm sure of it. And just to give you one example of that, going back to this universal jurisdiction issue, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party were trying to put this limitation on it to prevent arrest warrants being issued by civil rights lawyers. David Cameron, now the Prime Minister, his party put a full-page ad into the Jewish Chronicle just before the election last year saying that they were going to do just this, that is to say restrict universal jurisdiction. So quite clearly they're an important group. They're not that big. We're probably talking about 300,000, 400,000 British Jews, but they play a significant role in right across the social and business world in the UK. So that's not to say they're all pro-Israeli. They're not. You saw quite a few of these there actually there on the front line there with Tom. There were at least two of them there who were British Jews operating, and there's a lot more as well. So I think the Jewish population in the UK is a bit split on this issue. Yeah, I think. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry. If I could just add something. Of course, Rupert Murdoch controls media, a large part of the media in the UK, as he does in other places, including America, of course. And in fact, his power was just allowed to be increased very recently, with being allowed to take a controlling interest in Sky B, one of the major, if not the major, media corporation operating in the UK. That kind of has a certain effect as well. Thank you, Jerry. Would anyone else like to put a question or make a point? Yeah? Would you like to go to the microphone so we can hear? And again, do tell us your name, and if you have a particular affiliation that you're prepared to tell us about, then do that as well, please. Otherwise, your name is quite enough. We're just not having any luck with the technical arrangements this evening, are we?
Yeah,
right up until the very end.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is John Elwell Sutton. I'm a teacher. I have just a comment to Imtiaz, first of all, and then a question to both of the panelists. You asked at the very beginning about human life. The sad thing is that if your skin is black or brown, or variations of brown, you actually aren't very important. It doesn't matter if hundreds of thousands of children in Africa or South America die from, malaria or whatever. 3,000 Americans die from an attack, and about 1 million people die in response. So the sad thing is that the vast majority of the Western governments don't actually think anyone who is not white and Anglo-Saxon generally is really important. It's sad, but it's true. You asked why there's not a Palestinian state. Well, it's not in the vested interests of the powerful countries like America and Britain. But the question I'd like to ask the panelists is, where do you see a solution? Tonight's video was very